is a certain stillness. And consumption, where the kindness or labor of the many is harvested for the benefit of the few. Exploitation wears many masks, but its hunger is always the same: to take and take and take again. Seen through this lens, the statement becomes more than a caution. It becomes almost an equation of the human condition. On one side stands the finite, the fragile heart, the tired hands, the willingness to give until one's breath falters. On the other side stands the infinite, the relentless appetite of those who see kindness not as a gift, but as an opportunity. Between them lies the balance each person must navigate: when to give, when to withhold, when to recognize that to preserve the light of kindness, one must guard it from the darkness of exploitation. The metaphor stretches further still. If we imagine humanity as a vast constellation, each individual a star emitting light, then kindness is the radiance by which we illuminate each other. But not every star shines in equal measure, and not every galaxy respects the light of its neighbors. Some lights are consumed by black holes, massive centers of gravity that pull and devour without remorse. This cosmic imagery is not distant from our lived experience. The black hole of exploitation exists in families, in societies, in the invisible structures that draw kindness into themselves, until what once glowed brightly is extinguished. To live with kindness, then, is not merely to give, it is also to protect the source of that giving. to understand its limits, to recognize that the light must be nurtured if it is to continue shining. Without boundaries, kindness becomes martyrdom, a slow erosion of self until nothing remains. To offer without awareness, kindness becomes complicity, enabling the endless hunger of exploitation to flourish unchecked. This duality carries with it an almost tragic beauty, for it is in the very limitation of kindness that its value is revealed. If kindness were infinite, it would lose its meaning. It would become cheap, like air taken for granted. Its power lies precisely in its fragility, in the knowledge that each act of giving costs something real, and it is in this cost that kindness acquires its sacred weight. We must then begin our exploration here, at the threshold where kindness meets exploitation, where the finite encounters the infinite. The story of humanity can, in many ways, be traced through this tension. It is the story of saints who gave until they were broken, of civilizations built on the labor of the exploited, of individuals who learned too late that their generosity had been weaponized against them. Yet it is also the story of boundaries discovered, of kindness preserved, of light that refused to be consumed. To contemplate Long Tit Ko Achen, Kongge Li Dong Thur, Vienton is to enter a landscape where morality, psychology, and cosmic law intertwine. It asks us to look not only at others but at ourselves, how we give, why we give, when we must stop giving, and whether we too have taken more than was ever ours to take. It asks us to see kindness not as an infinite duty, but as a finite gift, fragile, and in need of stewardship. This introduction, then, is a doorway. Beyond it lies the architecture of themes and truths that pulse beneath the surface of these words. We will wander through the foundations of kindness, the abyss of exploitation, the myths that mirror them, and the practices that ground them in our daily lives. For now, let us pause at the threshold, recognizing the gravity of this idea and preparing ourselves to step deeper into its unfolding. At the core of the statement, Long Tit Ko Achen Kanji, Li Dong Tha, Vienton, lies a duality that is both painfully ordinary and astonishingly profound. It describes something most people experience in the minutiae of daily life, being drained by giving too much, or feeling the weight of being used. But it also touches a universal pattern, as if this small proverb holds within it a law of existence itself. To grasp its essence, we must look at its guiding pillars, those invisible structures that shape both the limitations of kindness and the boundlessness of exploitation. The first theme is the finite nature of human goodness. Kindness, like breath, is life-giving, but it is also cyclical. Each act of kindness draws upon energy, empathy, patience, and time. These are not renewable without limit. They require rest, care, and replenishment. Just as the heart beats a finite number of times, so too does the human spirit have limits to how much it can carry, how much it can give before exhaustion begins to fray its edges. When kindness is mistaken for infinity, when people demand or expect it without recognition of its cost, the result is not greater compassion but burnout, resentment, and the slow corrosion of the soul. This theme urges us to acknowledge kindness not as an automatic wellspring but as a resource that requires both respect and stewardship. Opposite, this is the second theme, the insatiable hunger of exploitation. Unlike kindness, which has an organic rhythm, exploitation has no natural boundary. It does not tire of taking because it is not rooted in generosity but in desire, entitlement, or power. To exploit is to see another person not as a being with depth and dignity but as a source of fuel, a means to an end. The hunger here is infinite because it is not really hunger for sustenance. It is hunger for control, advantage, or dominance. When one need is met, another quickly arises, and then another, like a flame that expands the more oxygen it consumes. In this sense, exploitation mirrors the boundlessness of cosmic entropy, spreading wherever resistance is absent. It is not that the exploiter has no limits, but that they refuse to recognize them, creating an illusion of infinite appetite. These two themes collide in a third, the necessity of boundaries. If kindness is finite and exploitation is unbounded, then the survival of kindness depends on the drawing of lines, on the recognition that to give endlessly is to cease to exist as a giver. Boundaries are not walls of cruelty, but the architecture of preservation. They are the skin of the soul, keeping what is sacred from being devoured. A person without boundaries becomes a vessel emptied by others, a candle extinguished by its own flame. A person with boundaries, however, learns to give in ways that sustain rather than destroy, to offer kindness as an act of clarity rather than compulsion. This theme suggests that kindness does not die because it is limited. It dies when it forgets its limits. Interwoven with these is the theme of illusion versus truth. There is an illusion that kindness must always say yes, that to be truly good is to give endlessly, to absorb every demand, to sacrifice without pause. This illusion is often reinforced by culture, religion, and even family, where selflessness is praised without regard for the costs it imposes on the giver. Yet beneath this illusion lies a deeper truth. True kindness is not endless giving but conscious giving, the ability to choose when and how to extend oneself in a way that preserves both the giver and the gift. The exploiter thrives in the shadow of this illusion, exploiting the belief that kindness must never refuse, but the truth is that refusal, when necessary, can be the greatest kindness to oneself, and sometimes even to others who must learn to stand without. Leaning endlessly on another core theme lies in the cyclical balance of reciprocity. Kindness, in its purest form, is not a one-way street. It flourishes in reciprocity, in the mutual recognition of worth. When kindness meets gratitude, it multiplies. When it meets exploitation, it diminishes. Reciprocity does not mean equal exchange in material terms. It means respect, acknowledgement, and a willingness to give back in whatever way one can. This theme reminds us that kindness is relational, not transactional. It is not a currency, but a rhythm, one that thrives in harmony and falters in imbalance. Where reciprocity is absent, kindness withers under the weight of exploitation. Finally, underpinning all these themes is the universal dance of light and shadow. Kindness is the light that allows life to flourish. Exploitation is the shadow that seeks to consume that light. Neither can be fully erased. They exist in tension, shaping the contours of human experience. The danger lies not in the existence of shadow. It is natural, inevitable, but in the failure to recognize it, in pretending that kindness alone can banish exploitation without awareness or defense. The deeper law at play is not that kindness must vanish in the presence of exploitation, but that it must adapt, protect itself, and shine in ways that cannot be extinguished by endless hunger. When we weave these themes together, a picture begins to emerge. Kindness is finite but precious, like a flame that burns only because it consumes fuel. Exploitation is infinite in appetite, but only because it refuses to honor limits. Between them lies the necessity of boundaries, the wisdom of reciprocity, and the courage to pierce illusions with truth. To live with these understandings is not to despair at the finitude of kindness, but to cherish it, to nurture it, to recognize that its very limits are what give it beauty and weight. This second section is not the end of the exploration but the laying of foundations. We have traced the guiding concepts, the finiteness of kindness, the infinity of exploitation, the role of boundaries, the illusions that blind us, the truth that frees us, the reciprocity that sustains us, and the eternal dance of light and shadow. With these pillars in place, we can now move deeper not into abstraction, but into story, symbol, and allegory, where these themes find flesh and voice. To grasp the weight of Long Titko Hckonji Li Dong Fa Vientan, one must step beyond concepts and enter the realm of story, symbol, and allegory. For human beings rarely live by abstract truths alone. We live by images, myths, and patterns that echo in the corridors of memory. It is through narrative that the essence of this truth breathes, taking shape in the archetypes of givers and takers, of wells and deserts, of suns and shadows. Imagine first the parable of the ever-flowing well. There was once a village where, at the center, stood a well that never seemed to run dry. Day after day, villagers drew water first for themselves, then for their families, then for their animals, and finally for their fields. They grew accustomed to its generosity, assuming the well's waters were infinite. They stopped planting near rivers, stopped conserving rain, stopped honoring the balance. One summer, when the sun burned longer than usual, the well began to sink lower. Its walls cracked, its water grew murky, and at last it dried. The villagers, panicked and thirsty, gathered around it in anger, cursing the well for failing them. They never saw that the fault was not in the well's limitation, but in their boundless taking. The well, like kindness, could give much but not forever. To believe otherwise was not faith, but exploitation. but exploitation. In another tale, we see the black hole of the cosmos, a star once bright and generous, radiating warmth across galaxies. It gave until its core collapsed, until it could no longer sustain the balance between burning and being consumed. What remained was not light, but a hunger so powerful it devoured anything that drew too near. Here lies the mirror of exploitation. When one loses sight of limits, when appetite replaces reverence, what once nourished becomes destructive. The exploiter is not unlike the black hole, endlessly consuming without ever being filled. Their hunger is not for sustenance but for the act of taking itself. This cosmic allegory reminds us that the infinite appetite is not a mark of strength, but of collapse into shadow, closer to human life. There is the story of the kind traveler and the innkeeper. A weary traveler, carrying little but hope, arrived at an inn one stormy night. The innkeeper, moved by compassion, gave the traveler a warm meal, a soft bed, and kind company. The traveler thanked him and departed at dawn. A week later, the traveler returned. Again, the innkeeper welcomed him, though this time he noticed the man carried no coin. Days passed, and the traveler stayed on, never paying, never offering help. Weeks turned to months. The inn, once lively, began to empty. Patrons avoided the place. Food stores dwindled, and still the traveler stayed, demanding more comfort. At last, the innkeeper, pale and weary, realized that his kindness had been taken hostage. The man he had welcomed as a guest had turned into a leech, feeding endlessly from his goodwill. With trembling hands, the innkeeper finally asked him to leave. In that moment, the traveler revealed his truth, not a weary soul in need, but a bottomless hunger that thrived on another's sacrifice. The innkeeper's act of drawing a boundary was not cruelty, it was survival. These allegories point towards something archetypal in the human condition. The well, the star, the innkeeper H represents kindness as a finite source. The villagers, the black hole, the travel H embodies exploitation's endless appetite. But the stories are not only about victim and exploiter, they are also about awakening. Each narrative turns on the moment of realization. The villagers must learn conservation. The star must accept its limits. The innkeeper must reclaim his boundaries. It is in awakening that kindness learns to endure, that it transforms from naive generosity into conscious, resilient compassion. Another symbolic layer is found in the myth of Prometheus. In Greek lore, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. Fire, like kindness, is life-giving. But with fire also came exploitation, wars, destruction, endless hunger for power. What was meant as a gift became something to be taken advantage of. Prometheus himself was punished, chained to a rock, his liver devoured daily by an ego lonely to regenerate, so the torment could repeat endlessly. Here we see mirrored the experience of the one who gives without end, devoured day after day by those who take, their kindness endlessly consumed, yet never enough. It is a myth not only of rebellion, but of the cost of boundless giving. From the East, we find the parable of the Bodhisattva, who vows to save all beings from suffering. The Bodhisattva extends compassion across lifetimes, across worlds, never refusing to help. Yet even in this exalted vision, the lesson is not that kindness is infinite, but that it requires transcendence of self. The Bodhisattva replenishes not by their own finite reservoir, but by tapping into the eternal. For ordinary beings who do not yet walk in such transcendence, to ignore the limits of kindness is to confuse ourselves with gods, and in so doing, to risk collapse. The allegory reminds us, kindness on the human plane is not endless, it must be protected, cultivated, and balanced if it is to reflect even a shadow of the divine. Symbols and stories serve as mirrors. They reflect back the truth that kindness is like a flame, beautiful, but needing fuel and protection. They remind us that exploitation, left unchecked, is not strength but parasitism, feeding on light until nothing remains. They teach us that boundaries are not betrayals of kindness, but the guardians of its longevity, and most of all, they echo the tragic, luminous beauty of the finite. Kindness matters precisely because it is not limitless. Its rarity gives it sacredness. Its fragility gives it weight. Having walked through these narratives of wells, stars, innkeepers, myths, and bodhisattvas, we begin to see the proverb not only as a warning, but as a mythic law of life. To give without wisdom is to risk becoming Prometheus, devoured daily by the eagle of exploitation. To give with boundaries is to honor both the gift and the giver. To recognize exploitation as endless appetite is to see the shadow for what it is, not a mystery, but a hunger that thrives on blindness. Stories open the heart, but they also prepare the ground for action. The next step is to ask, how do these insights translate into life? How do we carry the lessons of wells and innkeepers, of stars and black holes, into the very fabric of our relationships, our work, our societies? The symbolic becomes powerful when it finds roots in the everyday. The stories and symbols we have traversed, wells that dried, stars that collapse, innkeepers who awaken, would be little more than poetic echoes if they did not extend into the rhythm of daily life. The proverb, long tit koakin, konguji li, dong favientan, does not live only in metaphor, it lives in the quiet sacrifices of mothers who give beyond their strength, in the fatigue of employees burdened by colleagues who shift responsibility, in the aching silence of friends who feel their kindness has been mistaken for weakness. To truly understand it is to see how this law of finitude and insatiability plays itself out in homes, workplaces, communities, and entire societies. Kindness in practice begins with intention. When we give, we do so out of love, empathy, or a desire to ease another's burden. Yet intention alone does not protect the act. Without awareness, intention becomes a blindfold, and before long, the giver realizes that their gift has become fuel for another's endless appetite. This is why discernment becomes the unseen companion of kindness. In the practical world, discernment is the ability to ask, does my giving nourish, or does it enable exploitation? Does it empower another to grow, or does it chain me to their demands? Without such questions, kindness risks transforming into complicity in its own erosion. In personal relationships, this principle often emerges in the form of imbalance. One friend always initiates contact, while the other receives without effort. One partner always sacrifices, while the other grows comfortable in expectation. One family member gives endlessly, while others remain silent in entitlement. Here, kindness without boundary becomes the soil in which resentment grows. The solution is not to withhold kindness entirely, but to give in ways that create balance by setting clear expectations, by voicing limits, by ensuring that reciprocity, however small, is part of the exchange. Boundaries in relationships are not the end of love. They are the framework that allows love to endure. The workplace too is a theater where this proverb plays itself out daily. The employee who always volunteers to help is often the one who ends up carrying more than their share, while others exploit that willingness. The organization that relies on the goodwill of its staff without fair compensation eventually drains morale until burnout becomes inevitable. Here, the practical integration of the lesson means learning to say no without guilt, to recognize that professional kindness must exist within the framework of fairness. It also means restructuring systems so that kindness is not treated as a resource to be mined, but as a value to be respected. On a societal level, the proverb reflects larger patterns of exploitation. The labor of the many, often given out of necessity or hope, is consumed endlessly by systems that rarely return the same measure of care. Communities pour out goodwill in times of crisis, only to find that institutions exploit their resilience while offering little in return. Here, the finite kindness of the people collides with the seemingly infinite appetite of structures built to consume it. Practical integration means creating systems of accountability where kindness and contribution are not taken for granted, but honored with justice, reciprocity, and recognition. The most challenging integration, however, lies within the self. Many people struggle not because others exploit them, but because they exploit themselves, demanding from their own bodies and minds an endless supply of effort, care, and resilience. They mistake self-sacrifice for strength, believing that to rest or to set limits is selfish. But the law remains: kindness is finite. Even the kindness we extend to ourselves requires replenishment. This is why rest, solitude, and self-care are not luxuries but necessities. To neglect them is to become the innkeeper who lets the guest stay until the inn collapses. Self-kindness, grounded in boundaries, is the foundation that allows kindness toward others to flourish sustainably. The practical art, then, is not to stop giving but to give wisely. Wise giving considers timing, capacity, and consequence. It knows that a no at the right moment can be as compassionate as a yes. It understands that kindness without boundaries is like a river without banks. It spills, floods, and destroys, whereas within its boundaries, it flows with power and grace. Wise giving is not less kind, is more enduring, more luminous, more capable of resisting the bottomless pull of exploitation. And yet, in learning to set boundaries, one must also resist cynicism. The danger of encountering endless exploitation is to become hardened, to mistake vigilance for suspicion, to retreat from kindness altogether. But if kindness is to survive in the practical world, it must remain tender, even as it becomes wise. To close one's heart entirely is to let exploitation achieve its greatest victory, the extinguishing of the light itself. The balance is delicate but necessary: open hands, but guarded wells, generous hearts, but protected flames. Perhaps the greatest implication is this: to live with awareness of the proverb is to see kindness not as a weakness to be hidden, nor as a duty to be exhausted, but as a sacred gift whose limits make it precious. It is to honor the giver as much as the gift, to value reciprocity as much as sacrifice, to build systems and relationships that protect kindness from exploitation. In doing so, we create a world where kindness may be finite, but where its light multiplies not because it is endless, but because it is wisely tended, preserved, and shared. Thus the wisdom of Long Titko Hin Kong Gi Dong Thavientan becomes not a reason to despair, but a compass for living. It points us toward clarity in our giving, strength in our boundaries, and vigilance in our relationships. It reminds us that the shadow of exploitation will always be present, but that with awareness, we can prevent it from consuming the light entirely. In this way, the proverb is not only a warning, but also a map toward a more balanced, resilient form of kindness, one that does not vanish under pressure, but endures through wisdom. We have walked through the landscapes of this proverb, its fragile beauty, its cosmic metaphors, its symbols and stories, its practical reflections. What remains now is not only to understand, but to integrate, to let its wisdom transform the way we live and the way we give. Long Titko Hin Konjili Dong Tha Vientan is not a call to despair, nor is it a command to close the heart. It is a mirror and a lantern, showing both the shadows that threaten kindness and the light that makes kindness worth protecting. The mirror reveals the truth. Kindness is finite. It is like a candle burning, luminous yet fragile, capable of dispelling darkness but also vulnerable to being extinguished. To deny its limits is to dishonor its value. To see the boundless appetite of exploitation is to see clearly the forces that would drain this light without end. This clarity is sobering, but it is also empowering, because what is seen can be named, and what is named can be faced. The lantern illuminates the path. Kindness endures when it is conscious, when it is not offered blindly, but with discernment, wisdom, and courage. This means honoring boundaries not as barriers but as guardians, recognizing that saying no at times is not cruelty but protection. It means offering kindness where it nourishes growth, not where it feeds endless hunger. It means understanding that self-kindness is the root from which all other kindness grows, and that to neglect oneself is to weaken the very source of generosity. This transformation is not about shrinking kindness, it is about deepening it. Naive kindness says yes to everything, mistaking depletion for virtue. Wise kindness says yes and no, with equal love, knowing that only by protecting the flame can the light continue to shine. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. It transforms kindness from a resource to be consumed into a gift to be shared wisely, a light to be tended carefully, a force to be preserved for moments of true need. On a collective level, this transformation calls us to build cultures, communities, and systems that honor kindness rather than exploit it. A society that takes the goodwill of its people for granted eventually collapses under the weight of its own hunger. But a society that protects, reciprocates, and respects kindness becomes resilient, radiant, and humane. This is not utopia, it is the simple practice of balance. It is the recognition that kindness, though finite, can multiply when protected and shared wisely, creating ripples that extend far beyond what any single act could achieve. On a personal level, the call is even more intimate. It asks each of us to pause and reflect. Where am I giving from depletion rather than abundance? Where have I mistaken exploitation for friendship, entitlement for love, or demand for duty? Where must I draw a boundary, not to harden my heart, but to preserve it? And just as important, where can I continue to give with joy, knowing that my kindness is flowing into soil where it will take root, rather than into deserts where it will vanish? The proverb carries a quiet but urgent wisdom. It does not ask us to retreat from kindness, nor to become cynical about human nature. It asks us to awaken, to see clearly that kindness is not infinite, that exploitation is insatiable, and that wisdom is the bridge between them. To awaken is to refuse both naive martyrdom and hardened indifference, choosing instead a third path, the path of luminous boundaries, of compassion with clarity, of generosity with discernment. If taken seriously, this awakening becomes transformational. It shifts the way we live, the way we relate, the way we work, the way we love. It teaches us to preserve the sacred flame of kindness so that it does not burn out, but endures, offering warmth to those who truly need it. It teaches us to recognize the shadows of exploitation, not with fear, but with the strength to say, "Here, the light does not enter." It teaches us to honor kindness not as a weakness, but as one of the most powerful forces in the universe, precisely because it is finite, precisely because it is fragile, precisely because it must be chosen again and again. And so, the final call is this: guard your kindness as you would guard a rare jewel. Offer it not recklessly, but reverently. Let it be generous, but let it also be wise. Refuse to let exploitation define its limits, but also refuse to deny the truth of its finitude. In doing so, you will not only preserve your own light, you will create a world where kindness, though finite, multiplies in its endurance, radiating far beyond the reach of those who would consume it without end. The proverb, then, is not only a warning but a seed. Planted in the soil of awareness, it can grow into a tree of discernment, bearing fruit for generations. Its roots remind us of the limits of the human heart. Its branches remind us of the endless hunger that surrounds it. But its fruit reminds us that with wisdom, kindness can endure not as an infinite well, but as a carefully tended flame, capable of lighting countless candles without being extinguished. This is the transformation it invites us into, to live not in fear of exploitation, nor in denial of kindness's limits, but in the luminous middle path where kindness flourishes through clarity, protection, and conscious giving. And in walking this path, we honor the truth of the proverb while transcending its shadow, becoming both guardians and givers of the light.